The next Yakuza, or Like a Dragon, whatever you want to call it, game is something that we don't really know a lot about. Unlike previous years where you could just guess that the next game is going to be a sequel to a previous game, this game is being announced at Tokyo Game Show in September of this year, which makes it way too early to be a sequel to Infinite Wealth, which just came out in January. And with the conclusion of the audition competition, it's had my brain scrambling and forming all these thoughts about what the next game could even be. So this video is just going to be me trying to speculate and piece together what information we have to try to figure out what the next game's going to be. Before we get started on speculating though, we have to set one thing straight. Masayoshi Yokoyama, or the main director of RGG Studio, isn't exactly a trustworthy source. Not because he doesn't know what RGG Studio is doing. Of course he knows. He's the main director. It's just that he likes to lie. A really recent example of this is when the cutscene teaser for Infinite Wealth came out, with Kurohyou and Ichiban talking about proposing to women. Yokoyama says that Kurohyou is just saying this to go along with the conversation, and that there are no plans to bring back any of his previous love interests like Sayama or anyone like that. Then later, the Poundmates trailer drops and bam, there she is. And then the Bucket List trailer drops and bam, there she is. Anyway, there are 3 games that we can remove from the possibility list of being the next game. One being Judgment 3, the second being Dead Souls, and the third being Kenzan. Judgment 3, to me, doesn't seem like it'll happen, especially because of the whole Johnny and Associates situation that has been happening over these past few years. Johnny and Associates was the agency that managed Takuya Kimura, or Yagami, and they were the whole reason why the Judgment games were blocked from coming to PC at first. It's because of Takuya Kimura's likeness and all of those legal problems, and then you gotta get it managed with Steam and all that stuff and royalties. It's a whole lot of stuff. Then when the games did come to PC, Yagami wasn't even made into a Steam trading card, which is kind of fucking crazy. Then after that, the whole agency kind of blew up, so Yagami is kind of left in a limbo. I think that's why some of the recent games have shown the Judgment but not Yagami. It's because they can't. And that makes the future of the Judgment games uncertain, unless they just want to do another Kaito spin-off. I mean, who knows? Dead Souls not being next or remade is a lot more simple. Yokoyama said it won't make a profit for them, which is understandable. There's really no reason to remake it because only 5 people will play it. That's about it. For Kenzan, Yokoyama has said that it would require a lot more time and effort to remake it, especially rewriting parts of the story. I haven't played Kenzan, so I can't talk about its story content all that much, but what I do know is that the 3 Kiwami games we do have don't really change the story of those games at all. If the story rewriting will cost a lot more time and effort like Yokoyama says, then I really wouldn't expect them to dedicate so much to doing it. Especially since the last time they dedicated a lot to 2 separate games, we had 2 games with a lot of missed potential. I would rather they focus on making a whole new game than trying to rewrite and remodel Kenzan. With those games out of the way, we can move on to an honorable mention before the actual speculation. This one is more like a crackhead hallucination that I see as a possibility, and it kinda scares me, but I don't expect RGG to actually make it real. What I'm talking about is Yakuza Kiwami Kiwami. There's a world where the game is announced and then the TV show is released at the same time. In fact, the dates line up way too well. The announcement of the game is in late September. Then a month later, the TV show comes out. It could be like The Last of Us Part 1, where Naughty Dog remade the first game and released it a few months before the TV show came out, as a kind of small way to promote it. After the Yakuza TV show announcement happened, the RGG West Twitter even acted like Kiwami was the only game in order to promote the show. I'm not saying that RGG is Naughty Dog, I'm just saying that this would be a crazy good way to market your TV show and game, and it would be kind of dumb to pass on it. Another thing that contributes to this crackhead theory is that next year is the 20-year anniversary of Yakuza. Yakuza Kiwami was a 10-year anniversary game, so who knows what the hell they'll do for a 20-year anniversary game. It'd be really funny if they just remade Yakuza Kiwami. And plus, Kiwami does kind of need some touch-ups in some places, even though I do like the game, but that's besides the point. Anyway, I hope that Sega doesn't turn RGG into their Naughty Dog, where they just spit out remakes over and over and over and over. But now, we could move on to the actual game that could be next. Wanderings of a Golden Dragon Gaiden. Wanderings of a Golden Dragon is a story featured in the Yakuza gacha game Ryuga Gotoku Online, and it tells the story of Ryuji. Ryuji worked with Hanjun-gi in this story, and a few years back there were a bunch of screenshots leaked of a dev build of a Dragon Engine game with Ryuji as the playable character. He was also followed by Hanjun-gi in some of these screenshots, which ties directly into the story from RGGO. They even have the same outfits in these screenshots that they do in the renders for RGGO, and you could just chalk it up to a dev messing around with the models, but it's way too much of a coincidence to not be something, you know? Not only that, but in recent games, and Gaiden especially, Ryuji has been someone who's been mentioned over and over and over again. There are a bunch of sub-stories or Akame requests dedicated to him in Gaiden, and there's even one with an imposter running around as him too. Kurohyou even wonders in Infinite Wealth if Ryuji is somehow alive, even though he literally saw him die, which is a major red flag, especially with how many people have been brought back to life in these recent games. These things are important to consider because RGG has a tendency to have a setup bias and recency bias in their writing. And what do I mean by this? Well, RGG has shown a few times that they aren't exactly immune to having character biases in their writing, especially towards Ryuji, who is hyped up in Infinite Wealth even though he got destroyed in his fights. But this bias seems like it's coming from RGG's recent exposure to Ryuji after playing Kiwami 2 or writing something regarding him. If you want an example of this quote-unquote recency bias, you can see it in Yumi, where she went basically unmentioned in 10 years until Yakuza 6. Life is a Diamond is half about her and Haruka. Yakuza 6 and Kiwami were being made at the same time, so it isn't all that crazy to assume that maybe Ryusuke Hori saw Kiwami's story and remembered Kurohyou was in love at some point. An example of the setup bias is with Yakuza Kiwami and Zero's characters. Characters like Kazuma, Nishiki, Sera, Dojima, Majima, all of them are heavily favored because of how important and involved they are to Yakuza 1's story. It kinda hypes them up, like, holy shit, this Shimano guy is scary, and holy shit, this Sera guy is cool. And this brings me back to Ryuji. His return is slowly being set up by RGG because of these sub-stories and this weird gaslighting that he was super strong and gaslighting that he could possibly be alive. It's a really weird thing, and it's almost like what they did to Kazuma, giving him a lot of story importance and genius in Yakuza 0, so you could respect him more when he returned in Kiwami 1. Kurohyou wondering if Ryuji is still out there is also way too on the nose, like I said earlier. With what they've done to characters like Kashiwagi and Lao Kalong, I wouldn't be surprised if Ryuji was actually alive and had a nightmare where he was in Yakuza Dead Souls, like how Postal 3 was a nightmare. Anyway, speaking of threes, Yakuza Kiwami 3. Yakuza Kiwami 3 is a game I personally want to be real very, very, very badly. Its story is better than 2's, except for Chapter 9. Its map could be beautiful in the Dragon Engine, and it has Kurohyou at his happiest. However, Yokoyama has said that the next Yakuza game is not going to be 3, but he'd like to make it one day. Yokoyama is definitely telling the truth here, because even if the next game isn't Kiwami 3, there has been way too many reusable assets for Kiwami 3 in these past few games. I actually think that since there are so many of these reusable assets, that the next game or the game after it has to be Kiwami 3. The swimming and beaches of Hawaii could easily become the Morning Glory beaches. Kashiwagi, Lao Kalong, and Richardson could easily be touched up and reused for Kiwami 3. There's even a Mine suit in Gaiden. However, what I think is the most damning evidence for Kiwami 3 is Haruka. In Infinite Wealth, Kurohyou has a short dream sequence where he sees younger Haruka, specifically Yakuza 1 and Yakuza 3 Haruka. Now, the Yakuza 1 model, it seems fairly simple. They could just take the existing Yakuza 2 model and bam! But that doesn't explain why there's a fully detailed Yakuza 3 Haruka model. And this makes me wonder, why would the same people who didn't even bother giving adult Haruka a unique haircut make a fully usable model of Yakuza 3 Haruka? Especially since adult Haruka appears in much more scenes than Yakuza 3 Haruka does. Next, there are a few X factors that could help or get rid of the case of any game. First X factor, the audition competition. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that this had concluded and that the results were out, but if you don't even know what it was for, let me tell you. Last time there was an audition competition, the winners ended up doing live action videos for the cabaret clubs in Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name. I assume that this is the same here, but with the game and the show, apparently. The reason why this is an X factor is that it completely blows up any promise of another Judgment game. That's because for some reason Yagami could only date girls 20 years younger than him, automatically making these women too old for him and making it so that they have no place in his games. Nowadays, the Cabaret Club talking minigame isn't really common either. This actually adds more to the Ryuji Gaiden theory because, well, Ryuji had girls he could talk to in Dead Souls, and it wouldn't be out of place to have him in a Cabaret Club. I'm editing this video right now, and it just occurred to me that this next game could be a Ryuji game because Wanderings of a Golden Dragon was set in 1999, and let me explain. The Cabaret Club minigame where you talk to the hostesses and then take them out is like a really rare thing now. It's been slowly phased out over time, and Like a Dragon, The Man Who Erased His Name, the long-ass title, having it was a rare thing. Yakuza 7 or Like a Dragon doesn't have it, Judgment doesn't have it, Lost Judgment doesn't have it, and Infinite Wealth doesn't have it. Technically the last game to have this talking to minigame, Kiwami 2, because you could talk to Koyuki in the restaurants and stuff. But the point is that cabaret clubs have been slowly phased out in the games because their popularity has slowly been phasing out in real life. This was even said in an interview with Yokoyama. Because Wanderings of a Golden Dragon is set in 1999, that would be when cabaret clubs were still popular. As you can see in like Yakuza Kiwami, they have those sub-stories dedicated to those two hostesses. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Back to editing. The next X factor is the time. If I remember correctly, Yokoyama mentioned somewhere that The Man Who Erased His Name was made in around 6 months, which is pretty crazy. I mean, they already had all these pre-made maps, so it shouldn't be that hard. But keep that in mind, because this next game is being announced 8 months after Infinite Wealth, which doesn't give them a lot of time to make a new game, but it's still a pretty sizable amount if they were able to make a majority of the first Gaiden in 6 months. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's way too soon and way too fast to make a sequel to, Infinite Wealth. So it's realistically either a Gaiden that they started making around the time they finished Infinite Wealth, or a remake, and this is where the time plays in. Yakuza Kiwami 2 was relatively easy to make and relatively new because it just borrowed everything from Yakuza 6. Yakuza Kiwami was made relatively fast because it just borrowed everything from Yakuza 0. And that's the same thing for The Man Who Erased His Name. So unless the next game is a remake, it has to be a Gaiden game. Personally, I'd really like the next game to be Kiwami 3. It could be something that takes up the beat-em-up void left by Lost Judgment and The Man Who Erased His Name. They could keep the main games as RPGs, and then they could keep the Gaiden games or other remakes as beat-em-ups, which is what they did for The Man Who Erased His Name. Realistically, I wouldn't be surprised if the next game ends up being a slideshow of the audition competition winners. RGG did say at Anime Expo that the next game would be a surprise, so there's that too, I guess, to be another X factor. But whatever the next game is, I'll probably still end up buying it and playing it because I love Yakuza, or Like a Dragon, whatever you want to call it, and I just can't get enough of it. It's like an addiction, even though I'm playing through Infinite Wealth right now. But if there's one thing to take away from this video, it's that RGG has to give us Kiwami 3 Kurohyou in the Dragon Engine wide, just like he was in the original game. Please, RGG, please, I know you could make it. Please, I know you can make Kiwami 3. Yakuza 6 and Kiwami 2 were released a year apart, but you were able to make all of Sotenbori beautiful and in the Dragon Engine in that short amount of time. Please just imagine Okinawa in the Dragon Engine, Kurohyou, Yakuza 3, Okinawa shirt in the Dragon Engine. Oh my god, please, the bullfighting arena. But whatever it is, I'll still buy it and play it. Unless it just ends up being Yakuza Kiwami completely untouched, then I'm not buying that shit.